The marble floors of the federal courthouse echoed with the footsteps of attorneys, aides, and reporters jostling for seats inside courtroom 3B. Outside, news vans lined the street, their antennas pointed skyward, while activists with placards shouted slogans into microphones. Inside, however, there was only silence, the kind of silence that precedes something historic. Everyone knew this hearing was not routine. Judge James Boasberg, known for his no-nonsense approach, was set to preside over a matter involving Tom Homan, the former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The man once at the center of one of the most polarizing debates in America was now the one in the hot seat. Homan entered the courtroom with the same air he carried during congressional hearings and cable news interviews, firm-jawed, unapologetic, radiating defiance. His supporters saw him as a patriot who enforced the law with courage. His critics viewed him as the architect of cruelty. Regardless of perspective, no one could deny the weight of the moment. Dressed in a dark suit, his tie knotted tightly, Homan made his way past the defense table and placed a stack of neatly organized papers before him. He didn't glance at the gallery, but the gallery was glued to him. Judge Boasberg appeared moments later, robe swaying slightly as he ascended to the bench. The murmur of the courtroom fell instantly silent. His reputation preceded him, sharp, methodical, unwilling to be swayed by theatrics. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, and gavelled the session to order. Mr. Homan, Boasberg began, his tone already heavy with gravity, today is not about your rhetoric or your television appearances. This is about the law. And the law requires clarity. The tension was palpable. Homan leaned into the microphone. Your Honor, he replied, his voice firm but edged with defiance, I have nothing to hide. I've spent my career defending this nation, protecting our borders, and upholding the Constitution. What's happening here is not justice, it's politics. The judge's eyes narrowed. This is not a political arena, Mr. Homan. This is a courtroom. The exchange set the tone. For the next 30 minutes, Boasberg probed into the actions taken during Homan's tenure at ICE, decisions involving detention practices, orders carried out without proper warrants, and policies that critics said trampled on rights guaranteed by law. Each question was sharp, precise, designed to box Homan into admitting something more than what he had rehearsed. But Homan, battle-tested from years of hostile hearings, parried with equal force. I follow the law as written, he insisted. If Congress doesn't like the law, they should change it. My job was to enforce it. Yet every time he tried to pivot into a broader defense, Boasberg cut him off. Answer the question directly, Mr. Homan. Did you or did you not authorize detention in cases where the court had not issued the proper documentation? The room grew heavier with each exchange. Reporters scribbled furiously, activists clenched their fists. For many watching, it was not just Homan under scrutiny, it was years of immigration policy boiled down to one man being pressed for answers. Finally, the tension broke. Boasberg leaned forward, his voice lowering to a near growl. Mr. Homan, this court will not tolerate evasions. You are not on television. You are not before a congressional committee where time runs out before the truth comes to light. You are in a court of law, and this court demands accountability. Homan's face flushed. He straightened in his chair and spoke louder, his voice carrying into the gallery. With all due respect, Your Honor, I will not sit here and be painted as a criminal for doing my job. I protected American citizens. I enforced laws that others were too afraid to enforce. If that makes me guilty in your eyes, then so be it. Gasps filled the room. It was as though the air had been sucked out of the courtroom. Boasberg's expression hardened. The silence lasted several long seconds before he spoke again. Enough, the judge declared, striking his gavel once. Mr. Homan, this court does not operate on passion or defiance. It operates on the rule of law. You are hereby found in contempt. The words dropped like a hammer. For a moment, no one moved. Homan's attorneys scrambled to object, but the judge raised his hand to silence them. Marshal, Boasberg said firmly, you may proceed. Two U.S. Marshals, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, stepped forward. The scrape of their boots against the tile was the only sound. They approached Homan, who had gone rigid in his chair. His jaw clenched as he looked straight ahead, unwilling to acknowledge them. This is a mistake, Homan muttered, though it was unclear if he was addressing the judge, the marshals, or himself. The gallery erupted into a flurry of whispers, some of outrage, others of satisfaction. Cameras clicked rapidly as reporters tried to capture every second. The marshals paused only briefly before positioning themselves at Homan's side. One leaned in and whispered something, and after a tense beat, Homan slowly rose to his feet. He did not resist, but his body language was pure defiance, chin up, shoulders back, eyes blazing. The symbolism of the moment was undeniable. Here was the man who had overseen the detention of thousands, who had spoken with certainty about law and order, now standing in the same courtroom as a defendant being taken into custody. As the marshals prepared to escort him away, Judge Boasberg gavelled once more. This court stands adjourned. And with that, the hearing was over. But the story was only beginning. Outside the courthouse, the chants of protesters grew louder as word of the arrest filtered through the crowd. Reporters rushed out to deliver live updates, their voices urgent as they relayed what had just unfolded inside. Supporters of Homan shouted angrily at the cameras, calling it a witch hunt. Opponents cheered, calling it justice long overdue. Inside, though, the image that lingered was not of the crowd, nor the cameras, but of the confrontation itself, Judge Boasberg's unyielding demand for accountability and Tom Homan's refusal to bend. It was a clash of authority and defiance, and in that the moment Tom Homan was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Washington, D.C. seemed to vibrate with a strange electricity. Word spread like wildfire, igniting television screens, mobile alerts, and social media feeds within minutes. The footage of the former ICE director being escorted down the courthouse steps became an instant media storm, replayed again and again on every major network. To some, it was the ultimate symbol of accountability. To others, it was an act of political theater carried out in broad daylight. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Protesters who had gathered in anticipation of the hearing split into factions. One group erupted into cheers, chanting, "Justice," while another group shouted angrily, accusing the judge of overreach and political bias. Handheld signs waved in the air, some bearing Homan's name with praise, others with condemnation. News crews scrambled to capture every angle of the unfolding spectacle. Inside the courthouse, Judge Boasberg's ruling continued to reverberate through hushed hallways. Legal analysts huddled together, dissecting every word of his statement. "This isn't just a courtroom decision," one whispered into a live microphone. "This is a precedent. Rarely, if ever, do we see a figure of Homan's stature held accountable in such an immediate, public way." Meanwhile, Homan was processed swiftly by U.S. Marshals. His fingerprints were taken, his mugshot captured, and the booking papers filed with meticulous efficiency. For a man who once oversaw thousands of arrests, the reversal of roles was stark and humiliating. A career built on enforcing the law had turned in an instant, and now the enforcer had become the accused. The political fallout began almost instantly. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers scrambled to respond. Some applauded the arrest as a long overdue reckoning, proof that even those in positions of power were not untouchable. Others condemned it as a political stunt designed to silence a man who had unapologetically defended his policies. Cable news panels lit up with fierce debates, each side framing the event as either the triumph or the betrayal of American justice. President's aides were reportedly blindsided by the ruling. One insider told a journalist, "Nobody saw this coming. The expectation was a fine, maybe a censure, but not cuffs." The optics are explosive. Within hours, the White House was forced to issue a statement, carefully walking the line between respecting judicial independence and acknowledging the political shockwaves. But perhaps the most immediate reaction came from ordinary Americans watching at home. Social media platforms exploded. Hashtags like #HomanArrested and #JusticeServed trended worldwide. For some, it was a moment of vindication, proof that years of protests and demands for accountability had not been in vain. For others, it was an outrage, a sign that the justice system had been weaponized against a man who had sworn to uphold the law. Memes flooded timelines, some mocking Homan's defiant expression in the courtroom, others painting him as a martyr. Homan himself, now sitting in a holding cell, appeared shaken but not broken. Eyewitnesses reported that he sat with his head down for a time, then straightened, adopting the same rigid posture he had carried for years. "They think they can humiliate me," he was overheard saying quietly. But this fight is far from over. His legal team, scrambling on the outside, promised an appeal, vowing to challenge Judge Boasberg's decision as unconstitutional. As the day wore on, the nation's focus shifted to what this arrest meant in the larger scheme. Legal experts debated whether Boasberg's bold move would survive scrutiny. "This will go all the way to the Supreme Court," one analyst predicted on primetime television. If upheld, it fundamentally changes how federal officials are held accountable for their actions. If overturned, it could be seen as a dangerous precedent of judicial overreach. In immigrant communities across the country, emotions ran especially high. Some celebrated in tears, recalling family members who had been detained under Homan's leadership. For once, one woman told a reporter, someone in power is feeling what we felt: fear, helplessness, uncertainty. But others worried that the spectacle of the arrest might overshadow real policy reforms. This can't just be about one man, a community leader said. It has to be about changing the system that allowed those abuses to happen. That evening, as night fell over the Capitol, the courthouse remained surrounded by demonstrators. Candlelight vigils formed on one side of the plaza, while counter-protesters rallied on the other. Police presence doubled to keep tensions from spilling over. Helicopters circled above, broadcasting live images to millions of homes across the country. Back in his chambers, Judge Boasberg sat alone, aware of the storm he had unleashed. His decision, though grounded in law, was already being interpreted through the lens of politics. He knew that by morning, he would be painted as either a hero or a villain, depending on which headline one chose to read. But as he reviewed the transcript of the day's proceedings, he seemed unmoved by the noise. The law, he muttered to himself, is not a stage. It is a standard. For Homan, the next steps were uncertain. His attorneys filed an emergency motion for release, arguing that his arrest was excessive and politically motivated. Yet the symbolism of his handcuffs had already burned itself into the public consciousness. Regardless of how the legal battle unfolded, that single image had become a defining moment in the nation's political history. The following morning, front pages across America carried the story in bold type: Boasberg confronts Homan, arrest stuns nation. Talk radio buzzed, morning shows dissected, and late-night comedians prepared monologues that would carry the story into living rooms for days to come. The arrest had transformed into something larger than the case itself. It was now a battle over the meaning of justice in America. And so, as Tom Homan sat in a cell awaiting his next hearing, the country debated not just his fate, but its own. Was this the dawn of a new era of accountability, or the dangerous politicization of the courts? Was Judge Boasberg a guardian of the Constitution, or a reckless jurist overstepping his bounds? The answers, like the man at the center of it all, remained behind bars, waiting for the gavel to fall again. Moment, authority had prevailed. Part 1 ended not with resolution but with rupture, a rupture that promised even greater shockwaves in the hours and days to come.